Well, when it comes to living longer and living better, most of us focus on diet, sleep, exercise, but there's another trait that sometimes doesn't get quite enough attention, and that is grit. It's not just mental toughness, but it's really the ability to overcome challenges for long periods of time, keep on pushing through, even when things get hard. And life is always hard. There's always a roadblock. And really, I think that grit may actually be almost like a secret weapon in our toolbox for an extended lifespan and health span. And today we're going to dig into grit. And I've got a special guest to help me do that. Daniel Gospodarek is with us. So I'm going to give him a formal introduction, but first I want to welcome you, the listeners, to Healthspan Digest. This podcast is really focused on extending our health span. Health span is the length of time within our lifespan that we are healthy, active, vibrant, and we've really focused on the pillars of health span. This is exercise, nutrition, sleep, emotional well-being, and preventative care. And my name is Aaron Shaw, and I've been coaching HealthSpan, and I've been an occupational therapist and strength coach going on 30 years now, which is always a little bit breathtaking to say that. But yes, it's been 3 decades that I've been doing this. And grit is something that's been a point of interest for me for a long time because I've been called gritty before, and when I first heard that, I didn't know if that was good or bad. I didn't really know what that meant. And then as I've learned more about it, I wanted to cultivate that. Today we're honored to have Daniel with us. He is a licensed clinical social worker and founder of Revitalize Mental Health. This is based in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And he's going to draw from his personal journey recovering from a traumatic brain injury. This really has helped him dedicate his career to helping men, first responders, and military personnel navigate the complexities of trauma and mental health. He's got a really integrative approach, combining various modalities and therapeutic techniques, which we'll hear a little bit about today. And these techniques help foster healing and resilience. And what's interesting with when I first started to learn a little bit about Daniel was that his story really has, I think, grit kind of woven into it to be where he is today. So let's welcome Daniel to the podcast. Daniel, thank you for taking the time this morning to chat a little bit about grit.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show, Aaron. I'm excited to talk about this topic that, again, I think sometimes it's not talked about enough, or sometimes if it's talked about, it's just kind of seen as or talked about as just kind of being like stubborn, or and like there might be some stubborn qualities to it, but there's many different approaches to grit and what it can look like and how it can be used. It's not just like bullheading through something.
Yeah, that's interesting from somebody who's been possibly accused of being bullheaded from time to time. Well, tell us a little bit about your story, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of your personal story. So how did you end up doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so July 2009, I was a passenger in a one-car rollover, and we rolled, I think it was 4 times. After the vehicle lost control, I blacked out, so I don't remember anything until I woke up 3 days later in the ICU room. So, but from that point, I had to have a craniotomy because of a brain bleed on my left temporal lobe. Because of the brain bleed, there was a stroke in my left prefrontal cortex, or my left prefrontal lobe as well, and then fractured skull, collapsed lung, and then some more less severe just cuts and stuff like that, just from the accident itself. But so I didn't know anything like that had happened, right? I start kind of coming to and making sense of it all, and then did a kind of like overview of everything, right? So 10 days ICU, 7 days inpatient rehab, did some OT in there too. So shout out to the OTs, because what they do is crucial in supporting people on that recovery process. And then did 3 months of outpatient physical therapy, as well as 17 months of speech therapy after that.
Wow.
So, it's kind of that long game. Even though being 17 when the accident happened, I wanted to be at that end game within a week, because it was not fun.
Yeah.
Right.
Probably even more so as a 17-year-old, where maybe you don't have quite enough wisdom and life experience to realize some of big, big things happen over a long period of time.
Right, right. And you also don't want to take the wisdom when people that are older than you giving it to you because you're like, kind of like middle finger, like I want this now.
Yeah,
Right. I remember it was one of the doctors in the ICU room said like, hey, you probably, my senior year was coming up because this was July, so end of August. They're like, you probably won't graduate with your graduating or with the cohort that you started high school with. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it was maybe that bullheadedness at that time, but I was like, no, I will, and I ended up doing it. Um, but coming as a 17-year-old, right, like adversity can be extremely humbling too. 17-year-old, pretty high functioning in terms of the independence and things like that, especially with mobility and not needing help for a lot of things. And then my first steps after the accident were holding onto a wheelchair, and then I had three nurses around me with a gait belt on. And for people who don't know, like the gait belt is just something you put around your waist so that healthcare professionals can hold on to it. So in case you start to go down, they can either hold you or let you down easy. And it's like wow, like going from this level of life to like literally not relearning how to walk, but using some of the muscles that had atrophied over 10 days of being in an ICU bed. Um, it's quite astonishing what happens to the body.
that's amazing. Do you feel today like have you met your you back where you're supposed to be, or do you feel like things have changed, or how long did that process take before you felt like okay, I've caught up?
Yeah, it was probably like it varied for different symptoms, I guess you could say, right? Like I still like don't want to get hit in the head because I'm at a higher propensity of concussions, right? So I don't want that to happen ever,
Sure.
right? So
It's
that
good
will
advice
never
for
catch
everybody.
up, right? But the fatigue that often accompanies TBIs was quite significant for me to the point where I would go take a shower and I would have to take a nap afterwards while I was on the inpatient rehab floor. And then I was sleeping after I got discharged, after I was discharged, probably 14, 16 hours a day. And that was like, that was a good rip. Like for me, like
Wow.
I would sleep, 12, 13 hours at night, go to school for the first like 2.5 hours of the day, come back, take a 2, 3 hour nap, wake up, and then by that time, like my circadian rhythm was already ready to go back to bed in the evening. Um, so that probably took a good 2.5 years to really kick down to like where like, okay, I can actually stay out late or, do something like that with friends on campus. Um, and then sometimes the fogginess that probably was more of like 9 to 12 months in terms of like brain fog starting to subside.
This is a long process. I mean, one
Oh yeah,
obviously not of your choosing, and I think that
yeah.
um, I'll throw in a quote here from Angela Duckworth, who's if anybody's listening hasn't heard of her out, she's got a really great TED talk and a book about grit, but passion and perseverance for very long term goals.
Mm-hmm.
That's nice. And also, she says that living life like a marathon, not a sprint, which is hard for a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And I would say even for those of us that are in middle age, I think that uh, it's our bodies change. It feels, there are things that happen as we age, but sometimes in our mind, I'm still a 17-year-old in my brain. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
still like this impatience with like, I want the thing now. I don't want to take, what it's going to take months or weeks or,
Years. Yeah.
years to achieve a certain goal. That is in a sense from my perspective of grit, like that is grit. You have to have a certain amount of grit to
Mm-hmm.
keep on pushing through with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like it's interesting, right? Like we don't choose adversity often.
Right.
It usually chooses us or happens, from uncertainty. And sometimes even when you, depending on your age, depending on your life experiences, right? Like we may not even know that we have it until after we go through something and then we reflect on something. And I think like that is something that was very crucial for my development of the grit was I didn't drown out in, you know, social media or the noise or anything, right?
Mm,
I was just sit and like this is my jam. I'll sit in the weight room, right? It could, yeah, there might be music on, but it was just me, right?
it's kind of reflective.
Yeah, and like you find that, and that's something I often talk about, like with clients, is the difference between like isolation and solitude, and going back and forth, where like isolation is maybe more of like distancing yourself, and solitude definitely has distancing, but it has more of a purpose, right? Solitude has like, maybe there's an end goal of like some sort of reflection or meditation or mindfulness, and those are two very different things. Even though if you saw somebody just sitting by himself on a park bench, like you wouldn't know whether it was isolation or solitude unless you knew them,
Right.
right? But
It's
sometimes
like
we
kind of like
need to.
what's going on in
Yeah,
the
exactly.
inside your
Exactly.
brain.
Like what's the purpose, or how is it functioning, right, for that person? And I think like one of the ways to really almost like what was it, like Dead Poets Society, I think, right? Like with the bone marrow of life, right? Like we need to be in that quiet so that we can reflect and look and be like, wow, like that took a lot of energy to go through with whatever it was, right? It could, be like a illness, cancer, or maybe somebody lost their house in tornado or something like that. Like those are massive things that most people probably won't have to endure, but we can also take the life lessons that come with them, because one of the things that happens in life is that adversity will most likely come back in different forms at some point.
For sure. Yeah, and it seems like that this is a great sort of segue into the idea of reflecting on things that we have been through. Because I would agree that sometimes it's hard in the moment to appreciate kind of how resilient we are and what we're
Mhm.
like when there's discomfort. And I think that a lot of my clients and friends and myself and family and so on, it's easy to say it's been a really tough day, or this thing happened, I had a loss, I had a challenge, and it's so frustrating, and I feel overwhelmed. And in that moment, it's hard to say, and I'm gritty, and I'm resilient. It's because you're kind of in the moment of
Mhm.
the stress. But and I'd be curious how you utilize this with your clients, but the capacity to take pause and reflect and look back and say, and yet you're here today, and we could probably list off a dozen challenges that, or probably thousands of challenges that you've had in your life.
Mhm.
You've had work challenges, you've had really terrible days, you've had super stressful situations, you've had natural disaster, like all of these things have happened, and yet here you are.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah, and it's something I'm very mindful of in the therapeutic setting, to not like preempt them to say it, because it means a lot more if it just comes internally from yourself, right? Versus like if somebody were to implant it, like, oh, you have a lot of grit,
yeah,
right? Like I don't want to patronize, I don't want to talk down or have a paternalistic view, right? Like what does it mean for you that you went through that, right? Or I wonder how like somebody else, like an outsider, would view what you went through,
hmm,
right? To get them to like think in terms of what meaning does this have for myself, my family, those that care about me, those I care about, right?
yeah, you can kind of cue that up. So
Mhm.
what? Tell me a little bit about your clients. Like, what are some unique challenges that the clients that you see face? What's unique to them?
Mhm. So for my clients, I primarily work with men. I do work with some women, but focus on working with men. And I think it's the unique challenges are being a man or identifying as a male in this world, in existing inside these societal dynamics, and then also creating how each person, each individual, will create their own kind of defense strategies to manage stress, to manage emotion, to manage trauma or trauma symptoms, right? Whatever it might be. um, manage grief or loss, right? And in therapy, they never really, it's never really like the same person, right? It's everybody's unique, everybody's defense mechanisms are subtly different. So figuring out how do we decouple some of those defense mechanisms, and some of them might be like control tendencies, some of them might be escape tendencies, some of them might be avoidant tendencies, right? Otherwise we just have like general suppression or repression. um, and then so being in the present moment and then decoupling from some of those defense strategies so that they can feel whatever's on the other end of that, right? To know that, to help the body get to a space where it feels safe, where it feels calm, right, where it's regulated, the nervous system is regulated, so that they're in this ventral state of the nervous system and their body's like, I can maybe glance at that pain or notice some of that internal discomfort that I know I always had, but I've never been able to acknowledge it.
That's interesting. So, do you feel there's, or how do you identify when the moment comes when a client has the tools that they need? Like,
Oh, it's a great question. I just we just track the body, right? So we will start with like moving the body into more resourced, more like stability, more calm. And then the body knows what it needs, right? Like if you cut your finger and you're cutting carrots and it's just like a nick, the the you don't consciously need to tell your body to heal. It knows what it needs to do. It's all these thoughts around like maybe I could have been a better, firing buddy and that my buddy wouldn't have died, or if I would have arrived on scene 3 minutes earlier, that child wouldn't have passed away, right? So like all these different pieces, or even like the regret around not being able to make children's events, or maybe missing time. I'm just making stuff up,
mhm.
right? But it's those little pieces that get in there and they kind of like infect that cut, or infect that the body's processing of that situation, that then create like more of these trauma symptoms or stress or overwhelm or guilt, shame. And then that's what we work on decoupling from, right? And then we recouple like, wow, maybe I am actually a pretty good dad, but I also need to provide for my family and I can't be everything right now,
Mhm.
right?
So, when somebody's in a, I don't know if the right terminology would be in a moment of crisis, I assume when people first come to see you, they're probably in some sort of heightened sense to make that phone call, make that appointment, take the
Mm-hmm.
initiative to come in. When somebody's at that point, how is there a length of time that a typical client you could help them navigate from being in this state of having an obstacle, can't get through, work through something until you feel like this is probably going to take X amount of time to help you build some tools so you can be not bulletproof, but have the tools to deal with the next things that are coming up?
So I'll say yes and no, because that's how therapy works, right? Think sometimes people just coming to their first 1 or 2 sessions can just feel a little bit of hope, right? And or relief. And that's what we want to take, and we want to expand that relief inside the body, inside, so that they can connect with it. So that relief can spread. Maybe they feel it in their chest. Maybe we can spread it to their shoulders so their shoulders can drop, right? I will say that like usually the childhood dynamics of trauma, neglect, abuse typically take a little bit longer of a time to stabilize, because those are very ingrained neural networks and that's impacting brain development and everything like that, age of onset. So um, but usually in 1 to 2 sessions we can start slowing that body's response down, so that it's not idling at 5,000 rpms right about to hit the red line, but
Mm-hmm.
more so idling at 4, 3. And
Have
now we can
a little
start.
bit
Yeah,
of bandwidth.
yeah, because that's what we want to do with the nervous system in therapy, is bring back that flexibility. We don't want it to be just locked in, because then you're going to be locked in when you're trying to spend time with your kids, or trying to do like a work project that needs some level of creativity, and it's gonna be hard to access those resources when you're just like in that fight, flight, or freeze response, right? So
Yeah.
we want to bring back that flexibility so that if you need to go into fight or flight, you can. But also when you're with your children, you can be in that ventral state of connected.
Yeah. Do you have a success story? You think of somebody that, and again, I want to kind of frame this a little bit. That, seeing as there's so many directions we could go here.
Yeah, yeah.
Social worker and an OT talking, it's like, oh yeah,
Right.
what? But I think to stay respectful to this general concept of grit, which I think is interesting, that's
Mm-hmm.
woven into all the stuff that we do for sure.
Yeah.
But is there a story where you can, aside from your own, which is clear, um, of a client that you either help develop their grit or help them
Mm-hmm.
reflect and help them maybe sometimes
Yeah.
recognize, oh, I forget that I'm tough, or, that I do have this
Yeah.
resilience. Like, is there somebody you could talk that through? Of
Yeah, and I have to obviously keep it general
course.
for HIPAA and stuff like that, but I think we often forget about the maybe the more nuanced things that can create grit. So I do EMDR therapy as well as somatic experiencing therapy. So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And there have been a few people where we've worked on one memory for 3 months weekly
Wow.
to reprocess. And, and it's maybe not like, I mean, just that 3 month gap, right? Is that that kind of fosters grit of working through
Showing up.
a traumatic memory and showing up and putting in the effort and the work, right? And then it's also like getting to this other side of like, I wasn't really shown how to be XYZ in that memory,
Mhm.
but now I am, and I can ask that person for forgiveness, right? So doesn't always translate to grit, right? But it might translate to like I actually have the self-confidence and the self-esteem that I never thought I had,
Mhm.
right? So that grit is just interwoven in different terminology, right?
Yeah, I feel like grit it means, I think that it's easy to have like a general sense of what that means. Like, oh yeah, you're tough and you kind of, yeah, you're bullheaded as we talked about at the beginning, or you can kind of push through some things, um, without saying the word grit.
Yeah.
But I think that it's worth pointing out, and I can think of like with my coaching clients and people who I talk to, are like maybe prospective coaching clients, helping people identify that, for like in your example you just said, like to work on something for 3 months and maybe still feel like, I still got to work through it. I still got to work through it. I still have some, this is uncomfortable, but I still work through it. I could see how there's two perspectives of that. As one is, an individual could still feel like, yeah, but I'm not successful. I'm not through it yet. I'm not doing it. And yet, if you keep showing up and trying, like that is the grit. It's
Mhm.
the showing up more so than the, fixing something, which is
Right.
probably not the right word to use. But I think about that with clients that I work with, and again, I'm not dealing with directly the, emotional trauma, but certainly habits and decision making and consequences thereof, and consequences of aging and injury and so on,
Mm-hmm.
to really reward and help people find an internal reward for the process,
Mm-hmm.
versus like, don't wait to celebrate until the scale says a certain thing, or you
Right.
a certain weight, or you run a certain distance. Like, that's the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But you celebrate, you wake up today, I got this tough thing, the weather's not good, I don't feel super motivated, but I kind of push through and do it anyhow. To
Yeah.
me, like that's what I want to celebrate. That's what I want to say,
Right.
you're going to be okay, because of not so much, you know a year from now, but it's like today you're doing this
Right.
tough thing and there's friction to it, and yet you push through.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's hard, maybe this is human nature, to go back to our 17-year-old selves, where it's, I want it immediate, I want it now, don't tell me I can't do it. It's sometimes harder to get people to say, or to, and I say this for myself as well, even though I can preach about it all day long, it's harder to say, okay, I'm not there yet, wherever there is, but I'm going to push through this.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Just kind of keep working with your head down, right?
That's hard.
It is very hard because you constantly, and I even catch myself too, like wanting to look up and be like, "Are we there?" Like, is it good?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think some of it is like human nature, and some of it is like remembering that this is the long game. And like I listen to a lot of Gary Vaynerchuk,
Oh, yeah.
um, and he I mean, he's not talking to me, he's talking to the millions of listeners, but he helps me so
He's talking
much.
to me, actually. So,
Okay, okay. Yeah. That
yeah,
was the Aaron he
you're
mentioned.
right.
Uh, but like he just helps me kind of keep like the reality of you've been working on this for 2 years, like that's a blip in time, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and putting it to like more realistic expectations, because I think like the media, social media specifically, the news, even TV, like they make everything seem so instantaneous.
Hmm.
And
Everything's on fire immediately right now. Hurry up, do this thing. And
right, or even people like building wealth, right? Or
yeah,
traveling the world, like, oh yeah, I did this Instagram thing in 6 months. It's like, yeah, that's what it looks like, but
yeah,
then it might not be reality.
exactly. That's tough. Yeah, I think that having and to use some of Gary Vaynerchuk's language, in addition to having that grit, there's also being humble.
Yes.
And I think that is humble. Being humble, it's hard to be flashy and humble. And it's not a really good swiping material. It's like, oh, there's somebody being humble. It's way easier to be like, oh, I'm super tough and I get up at 3 a.m. and I eat dirt and do 1,000 push-ups and
Mm-hmm.
do all this super intense stuff. Like that looks maybe would fall in the bucket of like, oh, they're gritty, they're tough, they're bullheaded, they're pushing through at all costs. And yet there's also, and to go back to your story of somebody working for 3 months to go through one memory, one process, like that's, you got to be this humble and like this endurance
Mm-hmm.
that's nobody really likes, maybe because I want the quick thing immediately. And
Yeah.
Gary Vaynerchuk and others, and we can all speak to certainly as life goes on, look back to say I'm here because of a very long, drawn out, almost always not glamorous process.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think another word that doesn't get a lot of attention is that E word, that endurance word,
Mm-hmm.
right? It takes not only does it take a lot to break the human spirit, but the human spirit is a lot stronger than what we think it is.
Oh, for sure.
And if you just routinely show up and show up and show up, and you can even look at like more testaments of the human spirit when you look at people who've endured, you know, generations of racism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, or even like Holocaust survivors
Mm-hmm.
or other people in you know different parts of the world during civil wars, and yet they can still hold true to their values as a community, as a family, as a person, right? And you're just like, wow, like that person can hold for 50 years or 30 years or 4 years, like I can hold
Yeah,
for a minute.
yeah, for a couple of weeks. Well, yeah, certainly the obvious keyword or part of the word endurance is endure, right? So enduring tough, challenging things that are, again, this is where I try to like figure out a way to help encourage both my listeners to this podcast, but clients and friends and colleagues, is a little bit goes a long way. So it's more about the
Mhm.
consistency of doing a little tiny thing. It's
Definitely.
the Great Wall of China, one brick at a time sort of
Yeah,
concept, and eventually you get there. And in
yeah.
any 1 minute or one day or even 1 month or longer, it may not really be worth taking a deep dive in that moment because nothing really much is happening. So you got to
Mhm.
really kind of zoom out and say like, oh wow, but days, weeks, months, years of doing a little something, move mountains with that.
Yeah.
It's one shovel
Right.
at a time.
Right. You're just you then you can look back and you can say, wow, like, I paddled all that distance or
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So when you have a client uh, that you feel like is kind of stuck, and if you're trying to, this is like a tricky question on how to, and if you crack this code or solve the riddle, please let me know. We'll post this everywhere. But like
Yeah, yeah.
if somebody is looking to develop grittiness, to develop, maybe there's somebody who's, dipped their toe in the water of trying something, and whether it's taking care of their mental health, whether it's exercise or whether it's diet, and it's like, oh, I do something, and then as soon as it gets a little bit tough, I kind of just throw in the towel and say, oh, forget it. I think like,
Mhm.
do you have any guidance or suggestions to help, nurture a sense of whatever this grit is?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to sum it up in the most simplistic terms, I would probably say find something that challenges you and that's in line with a passion of yours.
Mhm.
And if you can overcome it, right? Like so that would be the end of the statement, right? Like find something that challenges you that's in line with your passion and your values. And that would be like that's your definition, right? And then it would be like and then once you accomplish it, then keep going. And sooner or later you're going to hit a point where it gets a little bit harder or you plateau at a certain weight or a certain like losing a certain weight or gaining a certain weight or with like a lifting max or something like that, right? Or whatever it might be. And then it's like, okay, what do you do next?
Mhm.
And overcoming those pieces help to develop some of that ability just to keep going even when things don't seem like they're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, that's good. I would agree. I think that to go back to Atomic Habits as a book I reference, often like these small changes um, are maybe by definition they're challenging to do because we have
Mm-hmm.
to be thoughtful and try to eat better or try to exercise or try to do whatever it may be. And by achieving a small thing intentionally and overcoming maybe that resistance, or it's like us, it's not easy to do a 30-second plank, but I
Mm-hmm.
did it anyhow. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like that's to me, like that's one grain of grit, or whatever that is. And to say like, how do we feed that little thing? And again, be humble enough to realize you're not, doesn't mean you're going to like, hike Everest or something like that because you can do a 30-second plank,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a start. It gives you a base for that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
define wins, I think is in my experience is like helping people find these small wins in addition to, as you said, like reflecting on, you've already overcome a lot of challenges in life. So even though you may say, oh, I'm weak, I always quit at stuff. And even I had somebody, just for a specific case that comes to my mind, I had somebody who was trying to lose weight,
Mm-hmm.
been on a diet, off a diet, on a different, I mean, through, decades of trying stuff. And like, oh, I can't, I'm terrible at this. And in my mind, I was like, wow, talk about perseverance. Like you have tried and failed multiple times. And yet here you are like looking for the next thing. I'm like, that is an endurance that is real. Like you keep showing up. It's like almost doing like this 3-month process that you talked about with your clients. Like,
Yeah.
on week two, are you done yet? No, but you're going to come back and do it again. You're going to
Right.
come back like,
Yeah, and I think it's not just the easy wins too. It's the small wins that are hard. And I
yeah,
think that's also too one of the reasons I love like I think athletics for young people, young children are so important, right? Um
100%.
not just the competitiveness, like yes, we need to be competitive, but like as you age too, there's almost a level of like interdependence that we need to have with other people. It's not always competition and domination, but the ability to overcome stress, adversity, problem solving. I think there's a lot of skills that are developed during that time. Yeah, so like we talk about like grit, right? Like so sometimes like people will be in here and they've been like, yeah, I've been like white knuckling this for the last 5, 8 years or 20 years, and or I lived with it my entire life, and I'm only 25 or 30, but like This happened when I was 5. And one of the things I point out is like now that might actually be like a defense mechanism that we'll need to work through. But sooner or later, that's going to become a tailwind for you.
Hmm.
And you'll be able to use that in whatever else shows up in your life.
Yeah, interesting. So it's almost like as you overcome, like for a period of time, it's a weight.
Mm-hmm.
You feel like it's holding you back, but once you kind of push through that, it actually becomes almost like a superpower.
Sure. I mean, even if the person that you were explaining, of like, say they've been working on weight loss for 8 years, right? And they're like, yeah, I wasted all this time, all this money, all this investment, right? Then it finally worked. And then they're like, at this point, they're like, I wouldn't have also met Aaron if I didn't do all that stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. There's a sense of where we need more awareness, or try to cultivate some awareness of this process. And I'm self shamelessly, I'm a journaling kind of guy, because if I don't write it down, I kind of forget it. And I also,
Mm-hmm.
and I would advocate, and you can correct me if this isn't what you agree with, but I think I'm a big fan of like everybody journaling, mostly because life goes by so fast, and especially now I feel like there's so much information coming in that I can look back on times in my life where it's not just like jotting down the thoughts of the day and here are the highs, here are the lows, I'm stuck, whatever it is, but to look back on that, to look back on times where I've, even fairly recent times, that I have not clear recollection of, but in the moment, in that day, it was a white hot problem. Oh man, I can't believe this is happening, or whatever. And then when I look back, like, oh, I guess I overcame that. I, you realize, oh, maybe I am grittier or tougher, or have more resilience and durability than I gave myself credit for. So sometimes having some way to look back on that, not just to do the journaling in the moment, which I think has value, but also to say, let me take pause and just kind of thumb through the last month or something like that, to
Yeah.
realize like, oh, this guy, whoever wrote this, must be pretty tough. They keep on
Right.
pushing through, even though in the moment it's like, man, looks like this guy's life's falling apart.
Right,
Realize,
right. And then you look and you see the author's Aaron Shaw.
oh, like, oh, that was me. Who was whining about that? That sounds terrible. Oh, that was 2 weeks ago. Like, I don't even remember
Yeah.
what it was, but
Yeah.
reflecting is important, I think. So,
Yeah.
so what's next for Revitalized Mental Health?
Yes, I think continuing to grow in just clinical skill development. So I'm almost completed with somatic experiencing therapy training, and kind of want to get into more of the so like supporting other people or new students that are in somatic experiencing therapy. So like doing individual sessions or case consultation and stuff like that, like working towards being able to provide those things. Um, and continuing just to provide effective treatment and efficient treatment too. I mean, I don't take insurance, which is nice because then we don't have to play that dance with the insurance company. But it, like, people invest in it, right? And like I want them to have gains. I want them to experience life in a way that maybe they haven't experienced before, or that they know it's possible, and they get back to that vitality of it. So just continuing to do that. Maybe go small group practice in the future, maybe not. I don't know.
Okay, a little bit of unknown.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, what I do every episode is listeners, one thing that they could do today to extend their health span.
Mm,
So this would be,
yeah.
obviously we're going to kind of frame this a little bit around grit, and so it
Yeah.
could be anything
Definitely.
to kind of put the spotlight on you. But if somebody's listening today, like, what can I do realistically today?
Yeah.
It's a typical day. They're walking their dog with a podcast and like, oh, that's interesting.
Sure.
What do you think?
So I would say that everyone will be hit with a level of adversity at some point in their lives, and sometimes more than once at one time, or within a short range of time. And it's how we use that adversity to either, we can say that it will define us, or we can use it to help us define our own lives, right? But it's your perspective on
So somebody could actually choose
it.
to control their perspective on.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe in the midst of adversity, it will be very difficult to see that, just like grit, right? But as you get a week out or a month out, right, and you're like, yeah, like I could use that to almost like elevate or propel you, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like looking back on a exercise session or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. You get the
Definitely.
benefits, the strength gains kind of later on as you work through that.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, you can check out Daniel's work, Revitalize Mental Health, at revitalizementalhealth.com. And I will put all of Daniel's contact information in the show notes. If you have any questions for me or Daniel, by all means, post them on, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can post a comment there. And on all the podcast platforms, there's the option to reach out as well. So,
Mhm.
Daniel, just really appreciate the time.
Yeah. You
So,
too, Aaron, and also being in the healthcare sector. So,
yeah, it's like I said, once I look at your credentials and hear what you're doing, and even as to go back, a long time ago now, but when I first got out of OT school, the first several years I worked in a dual diagnosis,
mhm.
um, outpatient. I was inpatient and outpatient, so it was like mental health and addiction, and learned a lot. You know, coping skills, communication skills,
Yeah.
all these fundamental things. So it's even though my career veered very much towards like the orthopedic side of things, I think it blends perfectly well. We're
Sure.
even with a broken bone, we're still human beings with very much emotions and our history comes with us. So
Yes, most definitely.
cool.
But have a good weekend. Thank
All
you
right,
again for having me and hope to hear from you in the future.
all right. Thanks, Daniel. Take care.